On the frontier, nobody got a happy ending. The pioneers who blazed trails across the West never received fanfare or farewell speeches. Most of the time, they got an arrow in the gut, a bullet in the back, or slowly faded away, forgotten on the edges of history. What follows is the raw account of how these tough men met their end. No myths, no embellishment, just reality. Jedodiah Smith. He showed up on the edges of the unknown with a rifle darkened by use and a barely sketched route in his memory. Jedodiah Smith, born in 1799, tore through the Rocky Mountains and the Southwest when almost no one else dared. In 1822, after joining William Ashley's fur company, he plunged into a daily onslaught of danger that turned him into an unwitting guide for an entire generation. He's the one who put the South Pass on migrants' radar, opening a route wide enough for wagons to cross the mountains. From Salt Lake to the Colorado River, he led the first documented expedition through those brackish waters, then crossed the Mojave Desert to Mexican California, a first for any American. On his return, he climbed the Sierra Nevada and conquered the Great Basin, where so many died of thirst. The following year, he drew the first overland route between California and Oregon. He survived 3 Native American ambushes and a bear attack that left him forever scarred. Between wounds and hastily drawn maps, he noted every valley, every river, every gap, setting the stage for the thousands who would follow. In 1831, Jedodiah Smith reappeared in St. Louis with a clear goal: convince the government to fund another journey west. The money didn't materialize, but his will to press on remained. He joined 2 partners and on April 10th, set out carrying goods toward Santa Fe. Everything was normal until May 27th, near the Cimarron River. The group needed water, and Smith rode ahead to find some. He never returned. With no extended search or solid clues, his men continued on. Once in Santa Fe, they spotted a Comanchero sporting the explorer's rifle and pistols. That blow made the loss real. No one witnessed Smith's final moments, but later reports spoke of a tense meeting with Comanche warriors. Allegedly, he tried to negotiate. When his horse spooked and bolted, an arrow hit him. Even wounded, he fought. They say he only fell after taking down the enemy chief and 2 more fighters. Impressed by his grit, the Comanche supposedly gave him the same burial rites they would a leader. His brothers recovered his weapons, but nothing could bring him back. For decades, his story languished in the margins of American memory, until historians retraced every mile and acknowledged his part in opening the frontier. And yet, Smith wasn't the only one the West tried to erase. Some men came back from the ashes, literally. Hugh Glass. Out on those wild plains, Hugh Glass seemed finished. A bear had mauled him, shredding his back and throat until he was on the brink of death. His companions, sure the end was near, paid 2 men to bury him when the time came. Instead, those men took his rifle and left him alone and broken. With no food or gun, Glass survived on sheer resolve. He drank water from streams, scavenged berries, and smashed a rattlesnake with a rock so he wouldn't starve. When he managed to stand, he limped through the woods, driving away wolves to fight over carcass scraps. Every step was powered by one fuel: revenge. Some tales say he crawled 350 miles. More conservative estimates claim about 200, all the way to Fort Kiowa. Along the way, Sioux warriors found him, tended his wounds, and gave him the chance to finish. When Glass staggered into the fort, the soldiers thought they were seeing a ghost. Then the hunt began. First, he tracked down the young man, possibly Jim Bridger, and instead of killing him, showed mercy. Let your conscience deal with you. Fitzgerald wasn't so lucky. Glass followed him until he learned the man had joined the army. Killing him would mean the gallows. Humiliating him in front of the troops cost nothing. He took back his rifle and left Fitzgerald with only his shame. It looked like it would end there. But Hugh Glass was never one to sit still. He spent another decade roaming the vast West, hunting and testing fate until 1833, when his luck finally ran out. On the banks of the Yellowstone, warriors from the Arikara, old adversaries, closed in on him. There was nowhere left to crawl. Glass fell and his body was trapped beneath the frozen river. Where does truth end and legend begin? The bear attack and betrayal are verified. The epic crawl, the hungry wolves, the live snake meal may have been magnified by mountain men's storytelling. Still, no one denies Hugh Glass lived when everyone else counted him out, and his name still echoes across the far reaches of the frontier. John Coulter. In 1812, people whispered about John Coulter's ultimate fate, but his crowning story dates back to 1808 in what's now Montana. He and his partner John Potts stumbled onto a Blackfeet war party. Tensions flared in an instant. Potts fought back, fired, and became an easy target, gunned down by multiple shots. Coulter, unarmed, was forced to strip. Instead of killing him there, the warriors set a grim challenge. They gave him a head start before the chase. He ran. Bare feet tore on jagged gravel. Cacti ripped his skin, and each breath burned like flames in his lungs. Miles went by, but the hunters never lagged far behind. When one Blackfeet finally closed in, Coulter spun to face him. Caught off guard, the pursuer stumbled. Coulter grabbed his spear and dropped him with a single strike. There was no time to pause. He dashed on until he spotted a river. Without hesitation, he dove in and concealed himself beneath drifting branches. Above, he heard footsteps, voices, the frantic search stretching for hours. When the noise finally faded and night fell, Coulter emerged, exhausted, bleeding but alive, while the forest swallowed the end of a chase that seemed unwinnable. That escape made Coulter a legend, but how his story ends remains a mystery. After exploring rivers and forests for years, he built a cabin near New Haven, Missouri, married Sally, and tried to settle into a quiet life. Then he vanished. Some say he succumbed to jaundice in 1812, buried near Miller's Landing. Others claim it was 1813. Another version has the Blackfeet catching up to him, leaving no survivors. Without proof, all that remains is the memory of a man who beat death once, maybe not the second time. Coulter's name still echoes on the routes he charted, a reminder of how harsh life could be on America's wild edge. Still, not every frontier legend fell in battle. Some were taken by something quieter: betrayal. James Beckworth. Some whispered that James Beckworth ended up tasting the very poison of those around him. But before that, he burned bright, living among tribes, guiding wagon trains, scouting for the army. Skilled and charming, he carved out paths on the frontier and endured where many failed. But fame couldn't help him once his luck ran out. Born enslaved in Virginia around 1799, he was freed by his father, who was also his owner, and learned blacksmithing. But his heart thumped to the rhythm of the West. He headed to St. Louis, plunged into the fur trade, and was eventually adopted by the Crow, who elevated him to the rank of chief. There he adapted in both body and mind to the mountains. His name spread across valleys and forts, growing with each new legend attached to it. During that time, he discovered Beckworth Pass, a gentle route through the Sierra Nevada. Thousands of settlers used that corridor to reach California during the gold rush. And to immortalize his feats, Beckworth dictated memoirs that boosted his own legend. In those parts, the past means little. Each step is a test of endurance. By the early 1860s, James Beckworth was feeling his age, yet still rode at the front as a scout for the U.S. Army. Then Sand Creek happened, the Colorado 3rd Cavalry strike that decimated the Cheyenne. Beckworth couldn't have stopped it, but they saw him as complicit, cutting off his trade routes. The land that once opened up for him now turned hostile. In 1866, a new opportunity surfaced, guiding a group into Montana. He set off, determined to prove he still had it. On the way to a Crow village, he was struck by severe headaches, nosebleeds, and dizziness, maybe high blood pressure. But rumors travel faster than horses, and Jim Bridger spread another story. The Crow had poisoned his food, doubting his loyalty or believing his time was up. Beckworth returned to the Crow village and died there. He was buried at Iron Bull's Lodge near Fort Smith. His name still endures on passes, trails, and the tales of those who survived the frontier's extremes. Some say he exaggerated, Maybe so. Even if only half of his stories were true, that's enough for legend. And legends rarely choose how they exit. Some slip away quietly, others go under a storm of cannon fire. Old Bill Williams. In 1849, rumors spread along western trails of a dismembered body, supposedly Old Bill Williams. Born in 1787, he grew up on rough terrain where the wind was his compass. He preferred forest silence over town chatter, and his trade shifted with the seasons: hunter, trader, guide, warrior. He spoke multiple indigenous languages and moved among tribes and caravans with ease. The Osage called him Lone Elk, an animal that roamed solo. For many settlers, he spelled danger. Williams rode alongside big names like Kit Carson, Joe Walker, and Jedodiah Smith, building a reputation as the man who always found a way where others saw none. Trouble followed. Horses taken from Spanish missions, seized goods, uncountable enemies. In one firefight, they say he gunned down 25 natives, a stain on any legend. By the time John C. Fremont arrived in 1848, Bill Williams was worn by the years. Time had hardened him, soaked him in alcohol, and rendered him unreliable, but no one knew the land like he did. Fremont planned a railroad route through the Rockies. Williams warned that braving the La Garita in winter would be a death sentence. He was ignored. The snow buried the expedition. 11 men froze to death and the mules were lost. Williams hauled the survivors south by sheer stubborn will. In March 1849, he went back with Dr. Benjamin Kern to search for any remains. For the UTEs, their presence was an invasion. That was enough reason. Warriors attacked in the snow, ending Williams's long and bloody path through the frontier. He'd lived by the mountain men's code: hard, fast, lethal. And in the end, it caught up with him. If Old Bill Williams fell in battle, the next man in this story tried quiet endurance until the West itself came for him. Bill Sublet. They say Bill Sublet juggled one unlikely future after another. Born September 21, 1799 on the banks of the Cumberland River, he watched his father Philip swap political dreams for land speculation and an inn frequented by roving travelers. Surrounded by mugs of ale and storytelling, Bill soaked up tales of how thin the line could be between living and dying on the frontier. When the family moved to St. Charles, Missouri in 1817, the 18-year-old Sublet was already making his own money, renting woodland, turning timber into fences, and selling them quietly. 2 years later, he wore a badge, first as a deputy sheriff, then patrolling city streets. But the city wasn't big enough to hold him. In 1823 came his chance to prove himself. General William Henry Ashley was recruiting men for the fur trade in the Rocky Mountains. Sublet knew more about figures and politics than trapping, but signed up anyway. He endured biting cold, clashes with rival trappers, and run-ins with native tribes while learning from the mountain men who measured courage by silent, icy nights. 3 years on, he finally reaped the rewards. Alongside Jedodiah Smith and David Jackson, he took over Ashley's business, staking his name on the routes crisscrossing the West. The beaver fur trade was drying up, and competition for what remained turned ruthless. In 1830, facing dwindling profits, William Sublet sold off his inventory and swapped his rifle for running supply trains. He led long wagon caravans along the Oregon Trail, proving it could bear heavy loads, a demonstration that caught the eye of anyone hoping to push the frontier to the Pacific. For years, he straddled the brutal wilds in the business world of St. Louis. Building Fort William on the Laramie River gave him a strategic hub and a ruthless reputation. When the fur trade finally collapsed in 1840, he survived by speculating in land and focusing on family. He married Frances Hereford in 1844, aiming for a fresh chapter. But tuberculosis arrived first. In July 1845, weakened, he left St. Louis for New Jersey seeking a cure. He died in Pittsburgh on the 23rd, far from the plains he had helped tame. The West pressed on, and some stayed to watch the last traces of the frontier fade. Joseph Meek. Joseph Meek never wanted a tame life. At 18, he joined William Sublet and the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, disappearing into the lawless vastness of the frontier. For the next 12 years, he traversed icy gorges, dodged native ambushes, and lived off beaver pelts, roaming the jagged slopes of the Rockies, always moving on, often alone if needed. In 1829, things took a darker turn. A Blackfoot war party scattered his group, leaving Meek wandering among the geysers and steaming vents of Yellowstone, which he described as fire sprouting from the earth itself, hissing like furious spirits. That mineral inferno pushed him to his limit, but it also taught him to read every sign in the land and trust only himself. His pivot point arrived in 1840. With the beaver market tanking and felt hats losing favor, Meek saw the old trade dying. He teamed up with Robert Newell and Caleb Wilkins and headed to Oregon country. At Fort Hall, they bumped into a handful of pioneer wagons. Guiding them to the Whitman Mission opened a path for the first wave of settlers to get that far along the Oregon Trail. Once settled in the lush Tualatin Valley, Meek traded his rifle for politics. He wore the red sash of the French-Canadian Coureur des Bois, symbolizing negotiation with tribes, and in 1843 joined the Champouet meetings that established a provisional government. He became sheriff, then a legislator. The former mountain man was becoming a face of the new order on the Pacific coast. The Whitman Massacre in 1847 spun Joseph Meek's life upside down. Cayuse warriors attacked the mission, killing Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, over a dozen settlers, and Meek's 10-year-old daughter, Helen. Grief turned to determination. Despite harsh winter conditions, Meek and two companions headed east with the news, warning of looming war. They spent months trudging through snow, living on scraps, battling exhaustion. By May, they reached Missouri, then traveled by steamboat and train to Washington, D.C. He arrived in the capital bearded, spent, and dressed in worn leather. Still, he walked straight into President James K. Polk's office and laid it out. Oregon needed federal status before the frontier turned into a powder keg. Polk listened. The following spring, Oregon got its first territorial governor, and Meek became the U.S. Marshal there. For 5 years, he worked to impose law on a land still shaping its rules. In 1850, he oversaw the hanging of 5 Cayuse men for the Whitman killings. Later, he led troops in the Yakima War, earning the rank of major. But the frontier was shifting. Cabins turned into towns, and progress inched forward mile by mile. Meek died on June 20, 1875, at 65, on his farm in Tualatin Plains. He passed on satisfied, seeing Oregon firmly joined to the Union. As he took his leave, another figure was sharpening his own legend, a story written in blood, bones, and a fierce drive for revenge. John Garrison, John Jeremiah Garrison. Johnston was born in 1824. After fighting in the Mexican-American War, he deserted and headed west. He tried his luck at gold strikes, worked cutting wood on steamboats, but history remembers him another way, as the terror of the plains. In 1847, Crow warriors attacked the Flathead camp where his wife lived, and killed her. From then on, Johnston converted his grief into a vendetta, not against a single enemy but the entire Crow nation. For a quarter century, he tracked small groups, ambushed hunters, took scalps, and so the story goes, ate their livers, the part the Crow believed held spiritual essence. They called him Dapiek Absaroka, the killer. Other tribes tried to stop him. The Blackfoot came closest. They captured him one winter, intending to hand him over to the Crow. Nearly naked, Johnston broke free, killed his guard, and trekked about 200 miles through snow-laden Rockies to safety. The campaign continued, driven by fear and fame, until finally his thirst for revenge ebbed, but the mark he left behind still reverberated in the Wild West. The Crow, once his prime targets, eventually embraced him as a brother. In the 1860s, he fought for the Union in the Civil War. Afterward, he scouted, bootlegged whiskey along the trails, and ended up a sheriff in Montana. The frontier aged, and so did he. He spent his last years in a veteran's home in California, dying peacefully in 1900. an ironic finale for a man who had danced with death for so long. Still, some stories refuse to die. As long as the Old West remains in our imagination, the name Liver-Eating Johnson will echo. Want to hear every detail of his revenge, the ways he survived against all odds, and the truth behind the legend? Check out the full episode on our channel. Explore the other chapters too. Each character of the frontier has a story to capture your imagination. For now, we end this segment with another kind of wild man. Not one who hunted enemies, but who chose to live among them. John Grizzly Adams. John Grizzly Adams started life perched at a shoemaker's bench in Medway, Massachusetts, where he was born on October 22, 1812. The leather and glue fumes felt too small for someone dreaming of endless woods. When the gold rush called in 1849, he left the workshop, his wife, and children behind to head west, not promising riches, just something different. Gold dust never made him wealthy, but in the Sierra Nevada foothills, Adams found something few people sought: bears. Instead of viewing them as threats, he treated them like trail companions. He began capturing cubs, naming them Benjamin Franklin, Lady Washington, and raising them with a mix of firmness and respect. Before long, man and bears took the stage in dusty little towns, drawing gasps and cheers with every performance. But that bond came at a cost in 1855. High in the mountains, a mother bear protecting her cubs attacked him. A swipe tore off part of Adams's scalp, leaving a hole the size of a silver coin in his skull, his brain visible to anyone who dared look. With no doctor around, he sewed it himself, wrapped his head in cloth, and hobbled back to camp. The wound never truly healed. Every step he took with the animals, every town he toured, was dogged by pangs that reminded him how fragile his adventure was. Even so, he stayed on the road with his trained bears, a traveling show crossing border after border, holding audiences captive, never sure when danger would strike. Crowds still loved the man who defied death in every act, but each show wore him down. The wound that never healed got infected, and one night a monkey bite hit that precise spot, making it worse. His decline was fast. On October 25, 1860, just days after turning 48, John Grizzly Adams lost the fight with the infection that had haunted him for so long. He died in Neponset, Massachusetts, far from the mountains where he found his purpose. Even so, his journey personified the frontier spirit, someone who embraced the wild, wore his scars openly, and became a legend for it. Grizzly Adams's story speaks of resilience, daring, and a nearly unbreakable bond with animals many feared. He lived the way he wanted and left the same way, leaving a legacy as enduring as the forests he called home. The Old West was unforgiving, and these men played by their own rules. They cheated death countless times, but in the end, even legends step aside. What remains? The stories. As long as they're told, the flame of these names stays lit, and you, who made it this far, keep it burning.